imagine for a second that you are just sitting at your desk. You're surrounded by the actual tangible proof of your own accomplishments. You know, you've got the degree framed on the wall, the official acceptance letter saved in your inbox, maybe emails from colleagues saying you just passed the latest massive hurdle.
Right, all the objective evidence.
Exactly. By every objective measure, you're doing great. And yet, beneath all of that, there is this nagging, incredibly loud voice in your head insisting that you are like a complete fraud.
Yeah.
It's telling you that any minute now, someone is going to walk into the room, tap you on the shoulder, and just be like, okay, the jig is up. We figured you out. Time to pack it up.
It is a remarkably isolating psychological state to be in. People experiencing this genuinely believe they have somehow, like, tricked everyone around them. It creates this constant low-level terror of just imminent exposure.
It totally reminds me of successfully sneaking backstage at a massive stadium concert.
No, that's a good way to put it.
Right. Like, you are back there, you're mingling with the band, maybe eating the catered food, but you spend the entire night terrified that security's going to tap your shoulder and throw you out.
Yeah, you're just waiting for the shoe to drop.
Exactly. Except, in the scenario we are talking about today, your name is literally printed on the VIP list. I mean, you earn the pass, you belong in the room, but your brain just flat out refuses to process the evidence.
It really does.
And that is exactly what we are unpacking in today's deep dive. We are looking at this massive stack of research spanning from like the foundational text in 1978 all the way to brand new data from 2024. And we're unpacking the actual mechanics of imposter syndrome, specifically within the high-stakes crucible of a PhD program.
Yeah, and our mission today is to fundamentally reframe this experience for you. Because, you know, we tend to view this feeling as a personal glitch. Like, it's just a simple lack of individual confidence that you can just, I don't know, therapy your way out of.
Right, like it's a you problem.
Exactly. But the science we're looking at reveals something entirely different. It shows that feeling like an imposter in academia is actually a profound structural and relational epidemic.
Okay, so let's unpack this from the beginning. Because to figure out how to dismantle this trap, we first need to define what we're actually dealing with.
Yeah.
Where did this concept even originate? I mean, I hear imposter syndrome thrown around on social media all the time now.
Constantly, yeah.
But it has actual clinical roots, right?
That does, yeah.
Yeah.
Though it's funny, the original researchers deliberately avoided the word syndrome. The term was coined back in 1978 by two psychologists, Pauline Roseclance and Suzanne Imes. And they called it the imposter phenomenon.
It's a phenomenon, okay.
Right. They defined it as an internal experience of intellectual phoniness. So it's this chronic state of self-doubt that persists despite, you know, verifiable, objective evidence of achievement.
Even when the framed degree is right there.
Yeah, exactly. You live with a persistent, internalized fear of being exposed as a fake. And they initially studied it in high-achieving women, but we now know it permeates literally every demographic, especially in academia.
And when you look at the recent data on how this affects graduate students specifically, the numbers are honestly staggering.
They really are.
Like there's this 2023 scoping review by researchers Wang and Lee looking at 40 years of data.
Yeah.
And they found that graduate students are, get this, 6 times more likely to suffer from depression and anxiety than the general public.
6 times. It's a massive multiplier.
It is. And in their first year, an incredible 92% of graduate students report feeling anxious. 92%.
Yeah, and the international scope of this is what really jumps out from that Wayne and Lee review. Like, this isn't just a localized cultural issue. A study from Ghent University found that 50.6% of their PhD students believe they suffered from the phenomenon.
Wow. Over half.
Right. And in a study of Romanian psychology students, the number was 56.15%. And then you look at a Canadian study of medical students, and it hits 73% reporting moderate to severe symptoms.
See, okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me, and I kind of have to push back on the terminology we've adopted as a society.
Go for it.
If 73% of medical students in a cohort are experiencing this, at what point do we stop calling it an individual syndrome and start acknowledging it as a massive environmental hazard?
That's the exact right question.
I mean, if almost 3/4 of the people in a building are coughing, you don't diagnose them with a personal respiratory failure, you check the ventilation system. We are like pathologizing the students for having a totally normal reaction to a toxic room.
The literature absolutely supports that perspective. And this brings us to the work of researcher Dr. Max Lempriere. He argues that academic imposter syndrome is, in fact, a highly rational response to a structurally flawed environment.
A highly rational response. I love that phrasing.
Right. He calls the modern PhD program a perfect storm, basically saying it's built on three structural pillars that practically manufacture this anxiety.
Let's get into the actual architecture of that environment then,
Yeah.
because, we usually think of university life as this bustling, collaborative, fun space.
Well, that might be true for undergraduates. But Lempriere identifies the first pillar of a PhD as profound isolation.
Wow.
Think about a standard corporate job or even an undergrad degree. You work in collaborative teams, you have daily stand-up meetings or, study groups.
You're bouncing ideas off people.
Exactly. But a PhD is intensely solitary by design. You read alone, you write alone, you analyze alone. You might only see your supervisor for, 1 hour every month.
If you're lucky.
Right. And because you don't have a team to calibrate your daily progress against, this calibration gap forms. And the human brain hates a vacuum. So when it doesn't have external data to confirm you are on the right track, the inner critic just steps right in to fill the void.
And that inner critic is never generous.
Mm-hmm.
It always defaults to the worst-case scenario, which kind of makes sense when you consider the actual work a PhD student is doing.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just lonely, it's unprecedented.
Yes, that is Lempriere's second pillar. The requirement of novelty.
Novelty.
Right, so for your entire life leading up to a doctoral program, you were rewarded for finding the already known right answer. The teacher had an answer key in their desk, and your job was to match it.
Right, you get an A if you match the key.
Exactly. But a PhD completely flips that paradigm. It demands a novel contribution to human knowledge. You are doing something literally no one has ever done before, which means there is no answer key, there is no template to follow to guarantee you are doing it right. You are just constantly fumbling in the dark.
And when you're fumbling in the dark, you desperately need someone to turn on a flashlight. But academia is notorious for its agonizingly slow pace.
Painfully slow.
Like, in a normal job, if I launch a project on Monday, I usually know if it worked by Friday. In a PhD, you might write a massive chapter in March and not get supervisor feedback until June. Or you submit an article for peer review and wait an entire year.
And that is the third pillar. Broken feedback loops. The system is structurally designed to delay validation.
It's like rolling a bowling ball down a completely dark lane,
Right.
And having to wait 6 months to hear if any pins fell over.
That's exactly what it feels like.
Of course, your brain defaults to assuming you threw a gutter ball. Your survival instincts are just trying to protect your ego from the eventual disappointment of failure, so you preemptively convince yourself you are a fraud.
When you combine those three elements, intense isolation, the complete lack of a template, and months of silence between feedback feeling like a fraud is no longer a pathology. It's just simple logic.
So the environment itself is a pressure cooker. But let's look at the actual day-to-day tasks required of these candidates, because the demands placed on them are totally contradictory.
This introduces a really fascinating concept from an ecologist, Camille Suzanne Delaveau. She calls it the specialist versus generalist paradox, and she uses an ecological niche analogy to explain it.
Okay, break that down for us.
So in ecology, a species is either a specialist, meaning it thrives in a very specific, narrow environment, or it's a generalist, meaning it can adapt to multiple different environments or niches.
And a PhD is theoretically the ultimate exercise in becoming a hyper-focused specialist.
Yeah.
You are supposed to spend years becoming the world's leading expert on one very specific microscopic slice of the universe.
Theoretically, yes. But Delaveau points out that modern academic research forces candidates to occupy their highly specific niche while simultaneously mastering multiple adjacent niches.
Adjacent niches.
Right. You don't just get to be a brilliant soil scientist anymore. To get your research published and funded today, you are suddenly required to be a computer coder, a statistician, a charismatic public presenter, a science communicator, and a specialized grant writer. Oh, wow. So it's like training your whole life to be an Olympic swimmer, but on the day of the race, the judges tell you that you also need to, perform a floor gymnastics routine.
Yes. Perfect analogy.
And when you inevitably stumble on the gymnastics mat, you think you're a bad athlete rather than realizing it's an incredibly unfair test of your actual specialty.
That captures the psychological toll perfectly.
Mm.
These adjacent niches, like advanced statistical modeling or software development, these are entirely separate professions that people spend decades mastering.
Right.
But because the PhD student is forced to do them just to complete their research, they inevitably struggle. When they spend 4 hours furiously Googling basic code troubleshooting just to clean their data, that inner voice whispers, "See? A real scientist wouldn't struggle with this. You're a fraud."
Oh, man.
They mistake failing in an adjacent niche for failing in their primary identity. That is so unfair. But okay, if the academic structure is this inherently demanding, isolating, slow, and paradoxical, what can actually mitigate this pressure?
Right.
Because we can't just dismantle the global university system overnight.
Right.
So the sources we have dive deep into the people who act as the gatekeepers of this whole system, which are the supervisors.
And this is where we get some of the most compelling, actionable data in the stack. There's this groundbreaking study from July 2024 by Slimy and colleagues conducted in Tunisia. And they surveyed 562 doctoral candidates and 152 supervisors, specifically to look at the relationship between a student's imposter syndrome and their supervisor's empathy.
Wait, hold on. I have to admit some confusion here.
Yeah.
How do you quantify something as subjective as empathy on a spreadsheet? I'm like struggling to see how you measure a human connection like that in a scientifically rigorous way.
It's a great question, and it relies on established psychological metrics. The researchers used the Baron-Cohen empathy quotient for the supervisors. So this isn't just asking, are you a nice person? It measures both cognitive empathy, which is the ability to intellectually understand another person's mental state, and affective empathy, which is the emotional drive to respond appropriately.
Got it. And for the students?
For the students, they used the Clance Imposter Phenomenon Scale, or CIPS, which scores the intensity of their fraudulence feelings.
So they essentially mapped the supervisor's emotional intelligence score against the student's anxiety score. What did the math actually show?
They found a direct, statistically significant negative correlation. Specifically, they proved that a 1-unit increase in a supervisor's empathy score correlates to a 0.122-unit decrease in a student's imposter syndrome score.
Okay, that feels profound. Empathy isn't just a soft feel-good concept. It actually operates as a mathematically proven protective buffer against this psychological hazard.
Exactly. It's a quantifiable buffer.
But what is the actual mechanism there? Like, how does a supervisor tuning into a student's emotional state change the day-to-day reality in the lab? Does it just give them permission to fail safely?
It creates psychological safety, which directly dismantles those 3 structural pillars we discussed earlier. An empathetic supervisor breaks the isolation through active listening.
Right.
When a student knows they are allowed to express an unfinished, messy thought without being judged as academically incompetent, it fundamentally lowers the stakes of that broken feedback loop. The student doesn't have to armor up before every single meeting.
That sounds exhausting to have to do.
It is. And conversely, when expectations are mismatched or communication is strictly transactional, student mental health just plummets. And the data shows many abandon their studies entirely.
The Tunisian study also broke down some vital demographic nuances that prove this isn't experienced equally across the board, right?
That's a really crucial point. The data reveals that female students experience significantly higher levels of imposter syndrome than their male counterparts, pointing to broader systemic biases they have to navigate. They also found that candidates who are employed, meaning they are balancing a professional career alongside a PhD, they are heavily impacted. The role conflict of being an expert at your day job and then a fumbling amateur in your PhD program creates massive cognitive dissonance.
Oh, I can imagine.
And on top of that, students who are married, divorced, or parenting face way higher pressure than single students.
It makes complete sense. When you have external life pressures, like kids or a mortgage, the stakes of the PhD feel astronomically higher. You don't have the luxury of just playing around with ideas. You need this degree to yield a return on investment.
Exactly. But there is a silver lining in that study.
Oh, good. What is it?
The data clearly shows that imposter syndrome levels notably decrease as students progress through their enrollment. A fifth-year student typically experiences much lower levels than a first-year student. Eventually, you do adapt to the dark bowling alley. You learn to just trust your own throw.
Okay, that is a relief.
Yeah.
But we also have to acknowledge that students don't enter these high-pressure environments as blank slates.
Definitely not.
We've established how current life pressures and academic structures trigger the syndrome, but we have to look at what the student brings with them before they even step foot on campus.
A massive empirical study in Finland by researchers Nori and Vantaja explored exactly this. They surveyed 1,694 PhD students to analyze their background factors, really looking for early life predictors of doctoral imposter syndrome. And they identified two highly significant factors.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first is a lack of encouragement in childhood.
Really? How far back are we talking?
All the way back to early education and family dynamics. They use sociologist Pierre Bourdieu's concept of habitus, which refers to the deeply ingrained habits, skills, and dispositions we develop based on our life experiences.
Right, our baseline programming.
Yeah. If you grew up in an environment lacking parental or educational encouragement, your habitus forms around a core of self-doubt. You develop this internal monologue that constantly questions your worth.
So essentially, we are packing a suitcase full of self-doubt in middle school, carrying it for a decade, and finally unpacking it right onto our university lab benches.
That's exactly it.
And it's not just baggage. It acts like a filter, right? If your habitus is primed for self-doubt, you will interpret totally neutral feedback from a professor as a devastating attack on your intelligence.
That is the exact mechanism at play. Your brain searches for evidence to confirm its oldest beliefs. And the second major predictor they found involves the student's path to the university.
Okay.
They found that a low level of career planning strongly correlated with imposter syndrome. Students who didn't have a clear, intentional plan, who sort of just drifted into their PhD applications because they didn't know what else to do after their master's degree, they were much more susceptible to intense feelings of inadequacy.
Because they lack an internal anchor. If you aren't firmly rooted in your why, then the first time the system challenges you, you immediately assume you don't belong there in the first place. You just think, I just drifted in here and now I'm caught. So we have childhood baggage, drifting intentions, structural isolation, paradoxical skill demands. I mean, it sounds like an inescapable psychological trap.
It does sound bleak, but the literature doesn't just diagnose the problem. It actually offers evidence-based strategies to rewire this internal narrative.
Okay, let's hear them.
Well, the first strategy is the most effective. You have to name the feeling out loud in front of your peers.
Why does simply talking about it work so well?
Because it shatters something called pluralistic ignorance.
Pluralistic ignorance.
Yeah, that's the psychological phenomenon where everyone in a group secretly feels inadequate, but because everyone is acting perfectly confident, each person assumes they are the only one struggling.
Oh, well.
Pauline Clance, who originally coined the phenomenon in 1978, she found that the moment a high achiever hears another successful peer admit to feeling like a fraud, the syndrome immediately loses its grip. Peer support is the active clinical ingredient that cures that isolation pillar.
That makes perfect sense. Break the illusion. But peer support alone doesn't solve the fact that you still have to face your research and your own inner critic when you are alone at your desk.
No.
How do you objectively prove your worth to yourself in those alone moments?
By creating a physical evidence file.
I absolutely love this concept.
It uses the academic mindset to cure an academic problem. You open a document and you literally catalog objective evidence of your success. Your admissions letter, strong feedback from a supervisor, a complex chapter you successfully drafted, a grant you secured.
Just raw data.
Right. When your emotions spike and tell you that you're a fraud, you do not argue with the emotion. You simply open the file and read the objective data.
I mean, a PhD trains you to rely on hard data and rigorous citations for your research, so we essentially have to treat our own self-worth like a peer-reviewed paper. We have to cite our own successes.
Yes, exactly.
You're literally building a bibliography of why you belong in the room.
And alongside that evidence file, the literature suggests adopting a specific mindset, wearing the beginner badge.
What does that mean?
A lot of doctoral students make a massive category error. They compare their day 3 of learning a new skill to a tenured professor's day 3000.
Oh, yeah. That's a recipe for disaster.
You have to actively remind yourself that as a PhD student, you are an apprentice. You are there to learn a trade, not to instantly know everything. You have to give yourself permission to just say, I don't know how to do this yet.
And what about managing the feedback loops? If the supervisor meetings are where the anxiety really spikes, how do we make those interactions safer?
The strategy here is to fundamentally change how you ask for feedback. Stop walking into a meeting and asking, is this good?
Because it's too broad.
It is a massive, loaded question that invites a subjective verdict on your overall intellect. It triggers all of your identity threats.
Right.
Instead, you have to ask narrow framing questions. Ask, Is the framing of this specific paragraph doing what I want it to do? Or does this statistical model accurately reflect the data set?
Oh, that's smart.
It forces the supervisor to provide objective data about the work itself, completely removing the judgment on your personal worth.
It takes the emotion right out of the equation. And I think it's important to remember that if you apply all these strategies and you still occasionally feel like a fraud, you are in stellar company. The sources included some incredible anecdotes that prove how universal this really is.
They did. Author Neil Gaiman once shared a brilliant story about attending a gathering of incredibly high-achieving people, artists, scientists, leaders, and he was standing there feeling like a total fraud who didn't belong, and he struck up a conversation with an older gentleman next to him.
Okay.
The man looked around the room and confessed to Gaiman, "I just look at all these people and I think, what the heck am I doing here? They've made amazing things. I just went where I was sent."
And the man who said that was Neil Armstrong,
Yes.
the first human being to walk on the moon. Feeling like he didn't belong in a room of accomplished people.
Think about the magnitude of that. And he isn't the only one. Near the end of his life, Albert Einstein wrote a letter to a friend where he confessed, "The exaggerated esteem in which my life work is held makes me very ill at ease. I feel compelled to think of myself as an involuntary swindler."
An involuntary swindler. The man who unlocked the theory of relativity called himself an involuntary swindler.
It's wild, isn't it?
If the man on the moon and Einstein both felt like they were faking it, it is absolute, undeniable proof that our internal feelings of inadequacy are highly unreliable indicators of our actual competence.
Our brains are fantastic at many things, but objectively evaluating our own worth in the middle of a complex, difficult task is definitely not one of them.
Definitely not.
Mhm.
So to synthesize this entire journey for you, imposter syndrome is not a glitch in your brain. It is not a personal failing. If you are feeling it, you're experiencing a completely rational output of a system that isolates you, removes all the answer keys, delays your feedback, and forces you to wear a dozen different hats at once.
Very well summarized.
You combat it by naming it out loud, leaning into empathetic mentorship, tracking your objective evidence, and just giving yourself the grace of being an apprentice.
But, as we look at the future of this phenomenon, especially regarding that specialist versus generalist paradox we talked about, there's a totally new dynamic emerging.
Oh, really?
Yeah. We discussed how modern researchers are forced into those adjacent niches, coding, formatting, running baseline statistics, and how struggling with those tasks triggers the imposter feeling. But we are right on the edge of a massive technological shift. Artificial intelligence is rapidly evolving to take over those exact tedious adjacent tasks.
Right. AI is getting incredibly good at writing code snippets, cleaning data sets, and formatting citations.
Exactly. So the question is, will this technological shift finally cure the academic imposter syndrome by letting specialists actually just be specialists again? If you don't have to struggle with Python code, will the anxiety vanish?
That's a really interesting point.
Or will the removal of these tasks just create a new, even deeper existential anxiety? If AI can do all the heavy lifting of the adjacent niches and rapidly synthesize information, what does it actually mean to be a human expert in the future?
Wow. That is a fascinating and slightly terrifying thought to ponder. As the technological landscape changes, the nature of our self-doubt is probably going to evolve right along with it. We might just trade one form of anxiety for another.
We very well might.
But for now, no matter what environment you are navigating, remember this. The next time you feel like you sneaked backstage and you are just waiting for security to tap your shoulder and throw you out, take a deep breath and look down at your hand. You are holding the VIP pass. You earned it, your name is on it, and you belong in the room.